And now we're up to Daf Tezayin Omid Beis. The Omar Rava Bar Machasya, Omar Rav Chama Bar Guriya Marav, Bishvil Mishkal Shnei Sloim Melas, Shahosif Yaakov LiYosef Mishar Echav, Nisgalgel Adover V'Yardu Avoseinu L'Mitzrayim. There were 2 sellers worth of fine woolen garment, which was the Ksones Pasin. And the Gemara in Shabbos defines melas as fine wool that's taken from sheep whose wool was covered from birth and remains unsoiled wool. And now Yaakov takes 2 sellers worth of that wool, right? A seller is a domination that's worth 4 dinrim. And for 8 dinrim, he purchases this wool, has this beged, Ksonos Pasim made. And as a result, there's tremendous jealousy of his brothers that led to the sale of Yosef. So why is Yosef, who suffered the most as a result of this of this favoritism, why is he perpetrating the same mistake by giving Binyamin 5 changes of clothing? And again, despite the fact that we explained that you could justify it, and certainly the brothers should understand why Yosef loved Binyamin more than the other brothers, but nevertheless, Yosef should have been very, very careful about this, showing favoritism. It's playing with fire. Omar Binyamin Bar Yefes. Now, what we're going to get here is that, in fact, the brothers, each one of them got a gift of garments that was worth more than the sum total of what Binyamin got. But Binyamin got it in 5 sections in order to transmit a metaphoric message. Remez, what's the metaphor? Ramaz lo Yosef was hinting to Binyamin with these 5 changes of clothes, or 5 kinds of garments. Sha'asid ben lotzes mimen, meaning this is an allusion to Mordechai. Mordechai is Ish Yemini on his mother's side, right? So he is a descendant of Binyamin. And Yetzem Lifnei HaMelech B'chamicha Levuche Malchus. He is going, as we'll soon, the Gemara is going to quote the Psukim in the Megilla, that he will go before the king, and he's attired in 5 royal garments. And he points out here the name of the Ein Yaakov, that the one garment that Yosef presented to each of the other brothers was equal in value to the 5 garments that he presented to Binyamin. There's no cause for jealousy. The only difference is that these single garments now were, so to speak, for the sake of Binyamin, were divided up into 5 smaller garments. Shenemar Mordechai Yotzav Uvush Malchus Cheles. That's number 1, V'chur. Number 2, V'ater Zav is number 3, V'tachar Putz is number 4, and Argaman is number 5. V'ir Shushan Tzahol V'samech. So that's Mordechai. V'yipol al Tzavarei Binyamin Achiv. Now the word Tzavarei is in plural. Binyamin is going to cry on Tzavarav, which is in singular, on the neck of Yosef at that point of reconciliation. But Yosef is crying on 2 necks of Binyamin. Kama tzavar and havalei Binyamin. The Gemara asks in a very naive way, how many necks does Binyamin have? Omar Abu Lazar, this is all a metaphor. Bacha al shnei mikdashim. Shasidim lios bechelko shel Binyamin. The 2 Batei Mikdashos were built in the territory of Binyamin. That itself was very complicated. For that, you have to learn Masechet Yoma, because part of the Beis HaMikdash was in the Chelik of Yehuda, and part was in the Chelik of Binyamin. But be that as it may, it's certainly true to say that both Batei Mikdashos were in the territory of Binyamin, Chasidim Lichari, and they will be destroyed. Now, why is Yosef crying at this point of reconciliation with his brother Binyamin? I shouldn't say reconciliation, but meeting again Binyamin after all these years, 22 years, and now he's crying over the Churban Beis HaMikdash. Binyamin Bachal Tzavarov, and that's in the singular. Bachal Mishkan Shiloh, Shasid Lios Bechelko Shel Yosef Vasid Bichar. And the Mikdash, which is called Mishkan Shiloh, but really has the same din as the Beis HaMikdash, which stood for 369 years, almost as long as the Beis HaMikdash itself, and it would be destroyed. It was located in the territory of Yosef. B'nei Nechem Roos, B'nei Achi Binyamin. Why again is Binyamin singled out? The translation here is, behold, your eyes see as do the eyes of my brother Binyamin. Why single out Binyamin? Over of Lazar, over Lehem, Yosef tells his brothers, Kishem she'ein belibi al Binyamin Achi. After all, Binyamin was not part of the enterprise of selling Yosef, and therefore Yosef held no grudge in his heart against Binyamin. Shalo hayam muchirasi is kach, so too ein b'libi aleichem. I do not bear any grudge against you. Ki pi medaber aleichem kein libi. That is my mouth that is speaking to you. Kipi, as my mouth speaks, so my heart feels. So what I'm telling you, that I am not holding a grudge, I've forgiven you, we're reconciled, all that is in my heart as well. What's strange about this whole thing, again, if I could add another kasha here, is later on, we see that the Achi Yosef were afraid that Yosef is going to avenge the sale. So on the way back to Yaakov, Yosef sends with his brothers 10 he donkeys laden with the best of Egypt. My mituv Mitzrayim, what does it mean, the best of Egypt? Amar Binyamin bar Yefes, Amar Lazar, Sholach lo yayin yoshem. This was before the Gzeira of 9 kosher wines. So he sent him wine from Mitzrayim. What's the symbolism of wine? And this is Yain Yoshan, aged wine. What's it called in English? Vintage wine. Shedas Sikenim Nochemen. The wine symbolizes that the older you get, the more wisdom you have. In most areas, people want the young people, but when it comes to wisdom and life's experience, the old wine symbolizes the wisdom of age. Now, Yosef had told his brothers that he bore no grudge against them, and yet, when Yaakov died, they feared that maybe Yosef was going to avenge them. So this is after the funeral on the way back of Yaakov, and the brothers went along and they flung themselves and they prostrated themselves in front of Yosef, begging him not to take revenge against them. Amar Binyamin bar Yefes, Amar Lazar, Hainu Damri Imchi, Tala be'idnei Skidle. Now, this is a very difficult piece of Gemara. Anyway, we're okay because the Gemara is going to X this out. But according to the transmission that we have here and the text, the original text, Yosef is being compared to a fox. And, they're bowing down to Yosef, just like when a fox has its hour, then you bow down to the fox. So in other words, sometimes the lion is king, but sometimes the fox has a certain assumption of rulership. And now Yosef has an assumption of rulership and success, and therefore we have to show the proper respect for him. We bow down to him. So the Gemara doesn't like this because Ta'ala, my bitziruse me'achve, it seems that the pasuk, according to this interpretation of Rabbi Binyamin, is putting into the mouths of the brothers that Yosef is inferior to his brothers. Bitziruse means inferior. He's a fox. Eliyid Mar Hachi, the Gemara has an alternative transmission of the statement here of Rabbi Yomi in the name of Rabbi Lazar, and that is that it was a comment on the pasuk by Yishtachu Yisrael Rosh Havito when Yosef comes in and Yaakov he bows his head from the bed towards Yosef. And we know, of course, that Yaakov is greater than Yosef. Yaakov is one of the Avos. He's the Bechira Avos. And as great as Yosef is, he's still one notch lower than the Avos, than Yaakov. So Yaakov is bowing his head towards Yosef. When the fox has his hour, then you bow down to him. So at that point, Yosef was the ruler of all Mitzrayim, and therefore Yaakov bowed to him. He comforted them and spoke to them upon their hearts. He spoke to them, and Yosef spoke to his brothers with words that can be reassuring, and they can accept it in their hearts. And what is that? Sarah, what's the significance of the number 10? Neros, you have 10 candles. Lo yuchlu lechavos ner echad. There were 10 shvatim that sold Yosef. Right, we have to subtract Yosef and Binyamin. And nevertheless, they wanted to extinguish one single light, that of Yosef, and nevertheless, they were unsuccessful to do so. So therefore, you have to make a calculation with the Kavachover that ner echad hech yochel lechavos asar neros. How could my ner, which is only a single ner, possibly extinguish the other 10 lights? So no harm could be done to you. This is perhaps the most famous drush on the Megillah. Rabbi Yehuda, Ora zu Torah. Torah is considered light. Ki Torah or, ner mitzvah Torah or. And that's a pasuk in Mishnah. And light means the light of mochin, of wisdom, of chachma, of the divine knowledge, the infinite knowledge. That's what Torah encompasses, and that's light. Simcha ze Yom Tov, shenemar v'cheinu omer v'samachto b'chagecha. Sason zu mila. Well, this is a little bit more challenging. Why is sason, joy, related to circumcision? Because of a pasuk in Tehillim, in Parakuf Yutes, that's, I think, the longest chapter in Tanakh. It says, I rejoice over your word. Now, the word imrasecha is critical here. And why is that? Normally, when the Torah introduces a mitzvah, it's with vayidaber Hashem. Here, instead, if you take a look at the end of Parashas Lech Lecha, when Hashem introduces the mitzvah milah, it says vayomer Elokim al Avram v'atas brisi tishav. Vayomer. Here it's vayomer instead of vayidaber. And therefore, when it says in Tehillim, Sasa Nochi al Masecha, that in Masecha, that David is in such a state of joy over Imra Secha, it's the Imra of Vayomer Elokim al Avram and Shmir Sabris and so forth and so on for the Bris Milah. Now, why is David HaMelech thrilled and in a state of joy for Bris Milah as opposed to the other 612 mitzvahs? And that's a Gemara in Masechet Menachos Daf Mem Gimel. And the Gemara establishes that David was in a bathhouse, he was naked, he couldn't perform any mitzvahs, and he couldn't put on tefillin, etc., etc. So he was a little bit upset about that. He couldn't study Torah in a bathhouse, but he remembered that he was circumcised, and he rejoiced, meaning he has a mitzvah that's with him, Tamid, the Yakar Elu Tefillin. And Yakar is a metaphor, honor for tefillin. I'm not sure why it says v'yakar. Usually it's pe'er is referring to, but it means the same thing, honor. All the nations of the world will see the name of God called upon you, and they will be in awe of you. Tanya, Rabbi Lezer HaGadol Omer, Elu Tefillin Shebarash. And there's a lot of discussion, especially in the Torah of Nachman, about birash, in the head. But be that as it may, we see that tefillin is awe-inspiring. Even the goyim are like in awe from the tefillin, and specifically the tefillin sharash, which is keneged atzilus, the highest of worlds. V'es parshin dasa aseres b'nei hama. And the Megillah lists the 10 sons of Haman, all of whom were hung up. Amar Rav Ada de Minyacho Aseres b'nei Haman ve'aseres. In the Megillah, it says Aseres b'nei Haman, and then the Vav afterwards seems to attach it and gives the entire enumerated list of the names of the Aseres b'nei Haman. What is this extra Vav teaching me? That Sarach l'mimrinu b'neshima achas. Now we have to read everything together. You read when it says Aseres b'nei Haman ve Parshadasa, etc., etc., Avisa, etc., Aseres b'nei Haman. And before the pasuk, earlier than the names, it says Chamesh me'os ish, and the Rava passes Shulchan Aruch that you should start this Neshima Achas with Chamesh me'os ish. Now it's interesting that every member of the tzibur recites the names of the Aseres b'nei Haman on his own. Why is that? The rest of the Megillah we hear from the Koreh. I forget who says it. Is it the Rogatchover, or maybe it's somebody else, says that because there's no din of Shomer Ka'ona when it comes to Neshima Achas. Neshima Achas is only something that you can do yourself. You can't do it on behalf of someone else. You can read on behalf of someone else, but not Neshima Achas. My timer, what is the symbolic meaning of enunciating all 10 B'nai Haman in one breath? Hulu Bahari Adodi Nafku Nishmasayu. They all died simultaneously, meaning they were all equal on the same level. They were all Amalekim and followers of their father. They hated Jews, and they just wanted to destroy Jews. Now, if not for the fact that you read it b'neshima achas, if you read it one after the other, you would think that they died one after the other. So we read it all in the same breath to indicate that they died simultaneously. Rabbi Yochanan Vav Devaizasa. If you ever look in the Megillah, you'll see that the Vav of the name Vaizasa is very long, very tall. It should be elongated. It should be long. But more important than that is the comparison. He says, Kimordaya delivros. Like a pole that's used by the boatmen on a river called the Libros. My timer, what's the connection here to this pole? Hulu bechad's kifa is the kif. There was only one pole, and it was like a very tall pole, and they hung up all Aseres b'nei Haman on one pole. By any chance, Rabbi, do you have any footnote on this? Why were they all hung on one pole? They all died simultaneously, and I don't find anything here. I also looked in my other Gemara, I didn't find anything. There's something critical here about the fact that the death of the Aseres b'nei Haman, the killing, was one unit. Not sure why that's so critical. If they would kill them one by one. I don't know why. All right. If you see anything, let me know. Right? I was very disappointed. Nobody says anything. Amar Rav Chanina bar Papa Dorash Rabbi Shelo Ish Kfar Tmarta Kol Ashiras Kulam Nichtavos Ariach Al Gabe Leveno, which literally translates a half brick above a whole brick. In other words, you have a part of the shira in the middle of the line that goes very long, and then below it, on two sides, you have the next line. And that's called Bariach or Riach al Gabi Levena. Chutz shira zu umalchei knan. However, this shira, I mean, when you have spaces in the text on the parchment, it's called shira, and that's going to happen twice. I mean, there'd be two exceptions to the rule of Ariach al Gabi Levena. The first one is Aseres b'nei Haman that go on top of each other, one on top of the other, which is called Ariach al Gabi Ariach, Levena al Gabi Levena, half brick on a half brick and a full brick on a full brick, and Malchei Knan. Malchei Knan are the 31 kings of Canaan defeated by Yoshua in Sefer Yoshua Perkid Beis. My timer, why are these two cases different than the general rule that applies to Shira of Ariach al Gabi Levena? And here it's going to be Ariach al Gabi Ariach and Levena al Gabi Levena. Ariach of the smaller bricks and Ariach and Levena the larger bricks, the whole bricks. You see, if you do it the way it's done by all other shiros, which means Ariach al Gabi Levena, Levena al Gabi Ariach, then when you fall from the smaller Ariach, you fall onto the Levena. You know, you could almost like climb up and climb down. But if it's one on top of the other, then when you fall, there's nowhere to stand. You're just going to go all the way down. There's nothing to your left, nothing to your right. And that's Mapalasam Shel Aseres B'nai Haman, Mapalasam Shel 31 Canaanite kings. They're just going to go down and they'll never have a recovery. Now, at this point, in the ratio of this pasuk, the beginning of the pasuk, it seems that Achashverosh is speaking in anger. Look at these Jews; they're killing so many people. However, Amar Rabbi Avo Balavich Malach Utztaro Al Piv. Now the Malach comes down and smacks him on his mouth. In other words, all of a sudden, through the intervention of an angel, there's a sudden turnabout in the tone of voice and the relationship of Achashverosh, because at this point he says to Esther, what do you want? You know, what's your request? I'll give you half the kingdom. And this was all done by the Malach. Now it's interesting. Bibo'ah means she appeared before the king. And it's written in the feminine, so it must be a reference to Esther. And it was written that the wicked scheme of Haman, which he had devised against the Jews, would recoil on his own head. And it's going to sort of boomerang back onto his own head. So the Gemara says, Omar. In the pasuk says, Omar ima sefer. Omar is in Lashon Zoh. And yet at the beginning of the pasuk it says, Ubibo'ah, which is a reference to Esther in the female, in the feminine. So Amra mi boile, it should have said Amra. No, Esther was the one who appeared in front of Achashverosh. She pleaded before him to turn the decree against Haman and null and void it. And to get those books back, you know, those letters back that was sent to all 127 provinces. So it should have said Amra. Amra Yochanan. Amra lo ye Omer b'peh mashikasav b'sefer. And there's a new halacha here in the mitzvah of Kriyas HaMegillah. So the word lo here means that she's speaking to the people of Israel. And Omar in a sefer means Yomar b'peh, Amira b'peh. In my sefer, mean what's in the scroll, what's in the writings, has to be read bal peh. And this is really what we're going to see later on in the Mishnah Daf Yud Zayin at the beginning of the next parak, that if somebody read the Megillah bal peh, lo yotza, he's got to read it out loud. Okay. Next. Divrei shalom ve'emes. Right, the pasuk indicates that words were being sent through letters of words of peace and truth. Okay, now here we have to bold the word emes, which is a description of Megillas Esther, but it's also a description, a word used to refer to the Torah itself, meaning a Sefer Torah. Again, everything I'm saying to you is before we get to the Shita of Tosfos and Menachos. But just the simple Pshat in Gemara before we get to Tosfos' interpretation is that a Sefer Torah needs sirtut. Right? Those are the lines, like a very precise line underneath the osios, and you write the osios on top of the sirtut. And that requirement, which applies to the Sefer Torah, we're deriving now from the Pasuk, applies to the Megillah Esther as well. He calls it etched lines. However, Tosfos and Menachos is not happy with this, because according to his opinion, and it seems many Rishonim agree, a Sefer Torah does not require sirtut. Our minhag is to use sirtut, because of those Rishonim require. But rather, the word emes here and the requirement of sirtut is a reference to the mezuzah. And the mezuzah is called Amita Shel Torah because it has a portion of the Torah that pronounces God's absolute sovereignty. So just like a mezuzah, according to everyone, needs sirtut, it needs etched lines, the Megillah likewise needs etched lines. Okay, now we get to that part of the Megillah where Esther and Mordechai are trying to prevail upon the Anshe Knesset Gedolah to establish the days of Purim as days of Simcha and Mishta. And not only that, if you read the Megillah carefully, and here probably pay to take out a Megillah, I don't know if we have time for that, but in any event, immediately, in that context, immediately before this, it says, Yemei Atzomos. And then it says, Umaymar Esther Kiyeh, that they accepted and validated those what's the word I'm looking for? Not institutions, those establishments, I'm looking for another word anyway, that were established by Esther. But wait a second, it says Maimar. Maimar is in the singular. Maimar Esther in, applying that they only accepted the holiday of Purim, but Divrei Atzomos lo. She also had put forth the idea of instituting fast days, because all of Purim was about the fast days and the tefillos of Klal Yisrael that brought about the miracle, that subsequent miracle. So when she asked for Divrei Atzomos, it seems from the Megillah, Umaymer Esther Kiyem, that they did not accept her request to validate and establish the Tzomos. Rabbi Yochanan, that's not how you read the Psukim. You read it Divrei Atzomos, Umaymer Esther. Emphasize the Vav, Hamachaber, that connects Divrei Atzomos with Umaymer Esther, and then the word Kiyum, Kiyem, which means that they validated it. The validation refers not just to the Megillah reading and the days of Purim, but also to the days of Tzomos. At the end of the Megillah, it says that Mordechai was viceroy to Achashverosh. The Gadol HaYehudim is a great man amongst the Jews. But then it says, strangely, Veratzui lerov echav. He was popular with most of his brethren. Lerov echav, Gemara darshans for most of his brethren. Velo lechol echav, were there members of the Jewish community that were not satisfied with Mordechai? And the answer is yes. That some of the members of the Sanhedrin, which is the highest court of the land, that's made up of 71 elders or dayanim, some of them were not happy at all with Mordechai. And why is that? Because Mordechai was dedicated to the study of Torah until he was appointed the viceroy to King Achashverosh. And from that time on, he was so involved as having accepted this position in the government in all the governmental duties on a daily basis, he neglected Torah study. Amar Rav Yosef, Gadol Talmud Torah, Yosef Matzos Nefashos. Talmud Torah is even a greater mitzvah than the actual involvement in the Hatzalah movement, in saving lives. Now again, as the Taz is very famous for saying, there are two different dinim. As far as Dechia is concerned, certainly Atzos Nefashis is Docha Talmud Torah. You can't just put your head in the Gemara and let someone die, Chas v'shalom. You obviously have to stop learning for the sake of Atzol. But as far as which mitzvah is greater in terms of its uplifting, inspiring impact on the person, Talmud Torah supersedes that of Atzos Nefashis. And from whence do we derive this? The Mikar Chashav Le'Mordechai Basar Dalid U'Vasof Basar Chamisha. And now we're going to learn a pasuk in Ezra and a pasuk in Nehemiah, and we're going to see that initially Mordechai was counted as number 5 on the list of greats, and then in the later pasuk in Nehemiah, he's listed as number 6. He fell. How do we see Lebasar Chamisha? Lebasar Arba. Asher Bo Im Zerubbabel. Let's count them. Number 1 is Yeshua. Number 2 is Nehemiah. Number 3 is Sraya. Number 4 is Relia. And number 5 is Mordechai. So Mordechai is after number 4. And that's the pasuk in Ezra. Now we shift over to the pasuk in Nehemiah. Ulbasof Ksiv Haboimim Zerubbabel Yeshua Nehemiah Azariah. We like that name. Ramsa, Ramya, Nachmani, Mordechai Bilshan. And Mordechai Bilshan is number 6 on the list. He got demoted. And why did he get demoted? Because he was no longer able to dedicate himself to the study of Torah, which is even greater than Atzos Nefashos. Omar Ravi, Tem Rabbi Shmuel Bar Marta. God old Talmud Tomer Yosef Binyan Beis Hamikdash. The study of Torah is even greater. And the building of the Beis Hamikdash, Shekol's Manche Baruch Ben Neria Kaim Lohi Micho Ezra Viola. Ezra was singled out with the mission of building the Beis Hamikdash Sheni, and yet he delayed that. He would not emigrate from Babel to Eretz Yisrael as long as his Rebbe Baruch Ben Neria was alive. And it means that he waited until the 7th year of the reign of Daryavish. In order to stay at Baruch Ben Neria's side, he needed to clarify his learning under his Rebbe's tutelage. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Shmuel Bar Masna Marta Gadol Talmud Torah Yosef Mikibur Avaim Shekol Osam Shonim Shodi Yaakov Avinu Beis Ever 14 years. He studied in the Beis Medrash of Chaim Be'ever V'lo Nenach. He wasn't punished even though he failed to get involved in the mitzvah of Kibbud Av Va'em. So after Yaakov received the brachos from Yitzchak, he ran away to Haran, and he didn't go there directly, but first he spent 14 years studying in the Academy of Aver. And when Yaakov was separated from his son, Yosef, for 22 years, he was punished for not honoring his father, but included in those years, it's not the 14 years that he spent studying Torah. Those were left out because you're not punished for the study of Torah, which is greater than the mitzvah of Kibbud Avayim. To Yomar Mar, and here we turn to that from Zion of an Aleph. Lama Nimnu Shnosav Shal Yishmael. Why did the Torah go out of its way to count the years of Yishmael's life? In order to calculate the years of Yaakov. So Yishmael was l'chora wicked. Why is Yishmael counted? So the Gemara tells us about Basa that Yishmael repented at the end of his life. And usually the Maharsha says the Torah mentions the years of righteousness, but here it mentions all of his years. And it says, Shnei Chayei, Eila Shnei Chayei Yishmael mi'as shana u'shloshim shana v'sheva shana. 137 years. And this is going to help us in order to calculate Yaakov's 14 years in the Beis Medrash of Shem V'Ever.